Find everybody. All right. And everybody's in. Good deal. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We had a number of participants sign up tonight, so we're going to give this just another minute or so to make sure we got everybody from the very beginning. But thank you for joining us tonight. We'll get started here in just a minute. Let's go ahead and get started this evening. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our Peachtree Shared Space project update. My name is Kevin Bacon. I am the director for the Office of Design of the City of Atlanta, Department of City Planning. Our department has been working with you all and many others on this part of the Peachtree Shared Space study since over a year ago, the summer of 2020, and I'm excited to have all of you back that have been with us along the way. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're excited to close out the year with this presentation, giving everybody an update on where we are at with the project. But first and foremost, the actual shared space study itself and the concept report that we have posted on our sharepeachtree.com website. That is available for everybody to review now, and talk a little bit about what we've seen with the demonstration project, which, as many of you I'm sure are aware of, a key piece of that study. And we'll talk also about what to expect, both in terms of what's next for the Peachtree Shared Space, the demonstration project, and other public spaces that we're doing in downtown, knowing that all of this work that we're talking about is really about public spaces in downtown. So we will talk about those items here tonight. Monique, if you don't mind going ahead on the agenda. I do want to acknowledge some other folks that are going to be helping us out tonight during the presentation. We'll have Monique Forte, who has been our project manager, and many of you who are familiar with this have probably met over the last year and a half. Jason Morgan, who is our assistant director in the Office of Design, is here tonight. Will be helping with the controls and with questions. Sonia Sequeira, who is our community engagement manager, and has been out there on the street with all of us and meeting with you all, and most recently at Parking Day in September. Addie Weber with our consultant team of tool design will be here to talk about the report that they've put together. Kirsten Moat from Modern Mobility, who has assisted with the modeling of Peachtree Street throughout the project, as well as the data collection. We'll be talking a lot about that tonight. I also do want to recognize our deputy commissioners here, Janet Sidipal. Thank you for joining us. And in just a moment, we're going to have some opening remarks from our Commissioner Tim Keene. I do want to talk a little bit really quickly about the just Zoom setup that we have for tonight. Just based on experiences that we've had with Zoom in the past, we do have everybody muted by default. We will, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We've got plenty of things to share tonight, so if there are clarifying questions that we can grab throughout the presentation, we will definitely do that, and then we'll have an opportunity for kind of more in-depth Q&A and conversation at the end. But we will be taking questions in the chat as we go, and respond more fully at the end, and have a chance for unmuting folks and following up in some discussion. So make sure to put everything in the chat. It's also a good way for us to document that as well. So with that, I'd invite Commissioner Keene to make some remarks. Thank Tim for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks everybody for being here. This is Tim Keene, Commissioner of City Planning for the City of Atlanta. First, I wanted to thank a few people, Mayor Bottoms in particular. She's been very excited about the potential of this work on Peachtree Street and Peachtree Center since we started discussing it with her towards the beginning of her administration. Councilmember Amir Faruqi, who's been phenomenally supportive and will be instrumental in this continuing. He's been a great leader in Atlanta as it relates to many things that have to do with the city becoming more urban, and including this. Monique, again, Forte from the planning department. This is her project. Kevin, of course, and everybody at the design studio, the consultant team that's been working on this, that's done a wonderful job, very highly professional job in so many ways. And then the people on Peachtree Street and the owners and businesses that we've been, communicating with for so long and have been so engaged and supportive every step of the way. This is not just a project to have some fun on Peachtree Street. This really is the city's transportation challenge now, and that is utterly redesigning our streets to be for people that are not driving cars. Not that we won't drive cars, of course we will. There'll always be people coming through this street, and that will be the major form of transportation in the city. The reality is, the only thing we can really do about traffic congestion in Atlanta at this point, we've built every highway we possibly could, is to redesign our streets for people, so more and more people can walk and ride their bike and use transit every day. And that literally is what we must do as a city in order to be successful when it comes to mobility. That's all we can do. Every city is congested. The center of every city that anyone wants to be in is congested. That's the nature of a city. Go to Paris or London. They have streets everywhere. They have these outer belts like our 285. And they're incredibly congested. The difference is that London and Paris also have London and Paris. They have cities, and so the question isn't whether we're going to have congestion or not. Of course we are. We're a city. We're going to have congestion. What else are we going to have? That's the question. And in Peachtree Center, we have such an opportunity because of the density of this place. It's the center of the largest city in the South, and it should be able to compete with any city in America when it comes to urbanism. Being a city, it can't compete with the suburbs. The suburbs win. It can compete when it comes to being a city if we can, as a city and as a community, change our streets utterly to be for people. And this is a step in that direction. We think Peachtree Street and Peachtree Center is a great place to do it because it is the center of the city. And you saw it in other cities. I'll just mention New York City, which closed 4 blocks of Broadway at Midtown and gave that street to people. As difficult a place as you can go in the world to change a street, and that's what they did. I mean, this is not that situation, but we're looking at what works here. And we think this idea of a shared street in these few blocks works here. And this demonstration project is really is in a way the clumsiest step in this process. We're doing something that we can do quickly and we can change easily and with little cost. So we can learn along the way, but towards as you'll see in the presentation, a distinctive, beautiful place, almost like a plaza where people walking, biking, driving, driving through slowly, can experience the city. And most importantly, that by changing our public realm in this way, it will give amazing opportunity to people in Atlanta along these 3 or 4 blocks, because right now, much of these 3 or 4 blocks, as you know, are blank walls and suburban entrances to buildings. And that's not the thing of cities. And changing the street and making it for people is really about creating this vibrant kind of urban environment. And we know that's possible here. And we have such great support from many of the people that own the property and are excited to think about what's possible next here in downtown Atlanta. So I think this is a really, really exhaustive as it needs to be presentation, since we're here at the close of this part of the process. And I thank again everyone who's been leading this on our team and the consultant team, and we'll hand it back over to you, Kevin, to get started with the presentation. Thanks for giving me a couple minutes here.
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here this evening. And for those wonderful remarks to open us up tonight. Many, if you wouldn't mind going ahead to the next slide. With that, I think we're going to jump in and talk. We're not going to go page by page through the report. We invite everybody to go again to the sharepeachtree.com website. As soon as you land on there, you'll be able to access it either in a viewer on the site or download it and work through it at your own. But Addie is going to go through and kind of hit the highlights of how the report's put together and some of the major things that we've talked about along the way, how they all appear, and some of the major conclusions that we've drawn. So Addie, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. And good evening, everyone. It's great to see several folks on here that we've seen throughout the night. Again, my name is Addie Weber. I'm working as a consultant on this project with the city. As Tim and Kevin mentioned, there has been a lot of work to date and a lot of discussions on the street and in virtual format. So I know we have a lot to cover today. I'll be mainly focused on the illustrative reports, which you can find online at sharepeachtree.com. Sonia, maybe you could drop a link to the document. So much of this time will be spent by myself and my colleague, Kirsten Moat, who will be discussing the data monitoring we did prior and after the implementation of the demonstration project. So next slide, please. Just to touch briefly where we started, which was a little over a year ago. We were tasked with 3 project deliverables. So the first was an illustrative concept report to move the vision and direction of the project established in 2016 by the city forward, a GDOT draft concept report, which really to help move forward funding should the city decide to secure that. And then finally, a demonstration project to test components of a shared space. This is what you see out there today on Peachtree Street. And it was really designed to test 2 things, because we can't completely test a shared space, but it was designed to test an expanded pedestrian area that has the flexibility to be activated. And hopefully a lot of you saw the activity that can happen when the city hosted Parking Day along Peachtree Street. And then removing a vehicle lane in each direction to encourage slower speeds, improve safety and comfort, and allow for the activation of the edges. Next slide. Inside the illustrative report, which I saw Sonia just sent out a link to, you'll find the full online version of the report. You'll be able to review our outreach process with visions and goals, the existing conditions report, which has been on there for some time, the alternatives we developed to get to the preferred concept, and the findings and process of the demonstration project. And then finally, the action plan, which highlights the steps forward, immediate all the way through 5+ years. Next slide. To those of you new to the study or those who haven't engaged in a while, our study area for this effort is North Avenue to the north and Marietta to the south. And it was originally divided up into 4 segments early on in the process, and those we felt continued to be relevant through our process in terms of character, existing conditions, and urban design. One of the major questions we asked early on was, where should a shared space happen along this section of Peachtree Street, and what does that look like? And during the discussions with the public and the public space working group, along with our existing conditions analysis and alternatives analysis, the middle segment, the Peachtree Center segment, it's area 3 in the light orange here, was identified as the preferred shared space of the area. The other segments play important roles in setting up the shared space, and I'll walk through those right now. Next slide. So I'm going to start here with the Peachtree Center segment, since it is the identified shared space. As I walk through each segment of the corridor, you can read a little bit of some key strategies that we have for each segment. And again, more that will be followed up in the illustrative report. So for the Peachtree Center area, it's, you know, the redesign of Peachtree Street as that exceptional shared space, the activation and pedestrian oriented storefronts, more residents, which is already happening with some of the great work that's happening right in the corridor with Banyan Street's effort, and an integration of art, culture, and fun in the corridor as well. Next slide. We developed several typical sections for this segment, this 3-block segment, a little bit over 3 blocks actually, between Margaret Mitchell Square and Hardy Ivy Park. They keep in place the existing infrastructure of the streetcar and allocate additional pedestrian space to areas that are currently a bit more constrained than others or don't have that shade structure of trees and things like that. You think at the 200 building of Peachtree and the lack of trees along there. You can definitely find more about these cross sections in the report, but what you can see across all these cross sections is a dedicated travel way for vehicles, buses, bikes, and even pedestrians, and areas that provide a more robust comfort area. In several of these locations, the arrangement shifts slightly, and that's to give more space to sides that kind of need that more pedestrian space, and also to kind of slow traffic down through these little shifts. And I'll walk through that here in the next slide. Next slide. So for orientation, we flip the map a little bit. So the south is to your left and the north is to your right. And as mentioned earlier, Margaret Mitchell Square and Hardy Ivy Park really provide excellent endpoints for this space. I mean, you wanted to know that these are gateway features without having something that says gateway feature. But these are your spaces, they're there today. And really what we want to do is integrate those into the overall space. So starting from the left, we're keeping the existing streetcar with an expanded pedestrian area on the west side of the street, which is the north in this view. This extends almost to Andrew Young, where we have the first of 2 shifts. This is for several reasons, the shifts. One, it's to slow drivers down. So it's not a lack of that gun barrel look, straight shot. It kind of gives a slight bend to the street. It also creates view corridors along the streets to look at the existing architecture and parks and art that can be found along the corridor. And 3, it sets up a more balanced street in the middle. This allows between Andrew Young and John Portman, the travelway in the center, and then there's another shift just north of John Portman through Hardy Ivy Park, really expanding the Hardy Ivy Park to be more integrated with the space. Next slide. So you might have seen some of these images in our 30, 60, 90-day reports, but these are some representatives of what the space could look like. It's curbless, it's ADA accessible, materials will be consistent, not only in this Peachtree centerpiece, but all the way from North Avenue down to Marietta. And it's activated throughout the day. There's a lot of different things that will need to be refined as you move through this process or then the next process. But this is a view of what the space could look like during the day at Peachtree Center looking south. And next slide. And we couldn't get away without doing a Dragon Con slide and what that could look like, really having that flexible use of space for folks to really engage and celebrate Atlanta. Next slide. And while we had really high hopes for Atlanta United this year, it just didn't pan out for us. And maybe we should have taken another look with the Braves fans. But this is in front of 200 Peachtree looking north. You can see the Portman architecture in the back and the activities. I mean, this is where the shared space is. This is kind of the beauty of the space, is that it allows people to come together in these big celebratory moments, but also, you know, where you can go to have those civic moments of daily life too that can happen in this space. It's really a space that's flexible for the uses of a vibrant 21st century city. That's actually not new. It's been around for a long time. Next slide. As mentioned, one of our recommendations calls for a redesign of Margaret Mitchell Square and Hardy Ivy Park. When you look at the true definition of a shared space, it really blends like the parks and street network into one. So it's really one holistic space. And again, these are great gateways and monuments into the city, into the space that we really want to celebrate and highlight. Next slide. And so this is a view, a bird's eye view, looking south, right just north of Baker Street. in Hardy Ivy Park and looking at how the shared space operates the pedestrians and the bicycles and the vehicular movement. Next slide. And this is a view north, looking north, right by Forsyth Street and Margaret Mitchell Square, with the activity and the green space kind of tied into it, keeping the existing streetcar where it is, and also activating the plaza space around MARTA. Next slide. So again, there's more details in the report, but some of the activation and programming strategies is the Peachtree Center Showcase, which pulls out some of the businesses that are down in the Peachtree Center courtyard area up to the front, really activating that. Streetside startup spaces, you know, little nooks where you can plug in and connect and do some work out there. The lawn at Peachtree Center has spent a massive effort kind of revamping their look and how do you really engage that space. The library as well has done a significant amount of rework and how do you begin to, you know, pull that out onto the street even further and have a central light reading room out on the street. And of course, the staffing of the space to keep it activated. Next slide. And then the land use opportunities. I think a lot of these have been kind of hit home in many projects and plans and reports in downtown, but the diversification of the building uses, activation of the ground floor levels, and some infill development that could occur in this space. Next slide. So I'm going to move pretty quickly now between the other segments, Emory University all the way down to Marietta, all have complete street components. And these streets, while they're not getting the same full-on attention as the Peachtree Center, they play a very critical role in setting up the Peachtree Center shared space for success. And the first one is Emory University. It's the area between North and Pine, and a couple of key strategies are making it a complete street, reinvesting and activating the vacant buildings, and developing parking lots as pedestrian-oriented buildings. Next slide. And a lot of these activities are happening today. So this is the existing cross-section to your left, which is 2 vehicle lanes in each direction. One of those lanes operates as the only parking on Peachtree Street that is allowed. And then turning that into a complete street with a dedicated left turn lane, bikes that are buffered by planters or some other material to really buffer that potential conflict, but also that material that's found in a shared space in Peachtree Center, extending it through the corridor. Next slide. And this is a view in front of Emory Hospital looking south of what that space could look like. Next slide. Again, some urban design opportunities, including the creative facade treatments and the planner program. Next slide. And land use opportunities. I think there's a lot of opportunities here for land use in terms of filling in the block, you know, developing the surface parking lots. Again, Emory and the area around this section really acknowledges that and really is set to really make this a more robust, vibrant place. Next slide. Connector crossing. This is from Pine Street to Peachtree Street, so it really kind of ties directly into our shared space. So again, this is redesigning it as a complete street, reinvesting in some of the active and vacant buildings, and developing parking lots along here. I think the bigger, longer term goal is to really implement the stitch and have that be really integrated into the Peachtree shared space. Next slide. So here you can see, again, 2 lanes in each direction, and the proposed, which is 1 lane in each direction. There's not a lot of left turn-ins. Specifically, this cross-section is right at the bridge, but really having some art visual components. We talked a lot about what is that Instagrammable moment, what draws you through the space. And I think this is an opportunity to really begin to set that stage as you start to move through that corridor and through downtown. And something exciting is really happening in downtown as you come off that bridge. Next slide. And so some of the urban design components, the Mayor's #1 park redesign, overhead bridge installation, and then the intersection redesign at West Peachtree Street and Porter Place. Next slide. Some land use opportunities. I think the big one is the stitch, which people are very excited about. It's a long-term effort, but it can be really integrated into this space and really tie it all together. Next slide. And finally, the Woodruff Park area. When we were talking with folks earlier on about where should the shared space happen first, Peachtree Center rose to #1, but Woodruff Park was also discussed. We know there's a lot of work happening there today. And so in the short term, we really see this as being an opportunity for a complete street, but in the longer term, it can really provide an extension to the shared space. It's got Woodruff Park, it's got great businesses that have that finer grain vitality that is really amazing to the Peachtree corridor, and it's got some civic monuments along it as well. Next slide. So this again is 2 lanes in each direction. Here, we're eliminating down to 1 lane in each direction, really exploring the park kind of coming into the space through here and activating it, really having those buildings and storefronts really kind of bleed out into the space and really activate that a little bit more. Next slide. And here's a view of what that could look like with the businesses that are down there today and the park to your left. This is a view looking south from Lucky of what that could look like. Again, curbless, this is a longer term shared space view. Next slide. So some of the big urban design moves, some of these are already in discussion. The removing of barriers of Woodruff Park, Atlanta Legacy Makers Park, and the removal of the right turn slip lane at Auburn Avenue and Lucky Street. Next slide. And then, you know, supporting these businesses and property owners to make sure they maintain a high level of occupancy and removing any kind of regulatory barriers that may prevent turning residential conversions and moving those into flexible uses. Next slide. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Monique.
Start my video. Thanks, Addie. So we, as you know, I'm going to talk about the demonstration project and the work that we're doing now. So we installed the demonstration project this past June. This is the first phase of the shared space. What you see out there now is not the final version of the shared space. What is out there now allows us to test some of the elements of a shared space while gathering feedback on things that work, things that need to be adjusted for our city. So, as you know, we repurposed one outer lane in each direction to expand the pedestrian areas, and we delineated those areas with planters to create space for people-centered activities, such as on-street dining. We also created a mid-block crossing in the heart of Peachtree Center and added ADA ramps to support the movement in that mid-block crossing. So we have been collecting data, adjusting the space based off of feedback that we have been getting. We have been consistently meeting with residential and the business community in this space. We initially talked about phase 1 being 90 days, but after some feedback coupled with uncertainties that we couldn't plan for, like the Delta variant and the impacts of those, we extended it to get a better sense of what is needed in the space. I'm going to go through some images of how we've been observing the community using the repurposed space, the demonstration project. So here, our infamous mid-block crossing. Some of the images also are during parking day, but this was during the green market. Here's some outdoor seating, folks enjoying coffee from the coffee cart for Costa. Some more seating. And this is me explaining the demonstration project to a group of folks. And here are some folks enjoying the on-street dining at Meehan's. Now we get to the work that we're doing now. As we have been collecting data, our project team produced monthly reports for the initial 90-day period. They're all available on the project website, sharepeachtree.com. In these reports, we break down the data that we collected, such as emergency response time impacts, ways we stayed in contact with the community, roadway impact, and et cetera. We thought this would be a great way to keep the community updated in a digestible format, as well as other interested parties. Now I will turn it over to Kirsten, who will really get deep with into the data that we have collected so far.
Thanks, Monique. Okay, so we're going to start digging into like some real traffic numbers. So hope everybody has their calculators ready and you're ready to do a bunch of adding and subtracting. I kid, and I know I can't hear any of you laughing, but let's dig in. So this section of the presentation, we're going to go through a lot of technical analyses that we did. We're going to start with some pre-demonstration activities, then we're going to talk about the traffic analysis during the demonstration, and then move into some emergency response that Joel is going to be presenting. So just as a reminder, if you have questions, clarifying questions, if you don't understand something, please put it in the chat. We're going to be monitoring those. I'm going to take periodic pauses so y'all can kind of digest and then also ask those questions. All right, Monique, let's jump into terminology. Okay, so starting with terminology. Next slide. Yes. Okay, so there's a few key terms that I just want to make sure everybody understands. The first is when I talk about modeling, this is what we did pre-demonstration. There are two terms. There's a no build and there's a build. So when we do modeling and we want to forecast what's going to happen in the future, we first want to forecast what's going to happen if you didn't do anything at all. If everything stayed the same as far as infrastructure improvements, but you still know that you're going to have increases in your residents and employees. So we still project those out and we say, okay, if we did nothing at all, how is traffic going to be impacted? What is congestion going to look like? Then we also do a build scenario within the model. So still looking out to the same year, we say, okay, if all of those factors are the same, all of those growth projections are the same, what if we did do a project? And how would that either help or hinder the vehicular traffic in an area? So those are those two terms. A couple of things that we measure within those models and when we do traffic analysis. One is level of service. So this is your typical measure of how congested a roadway is. And level of service is measured from A to F, just like a report card. A, no traffic, free flow, you can go as fast as you want. Level of service F, it is absolutely overloaded, it's failing, people can't get anywhere, you're stuck in traffic forever. And so that's kind of the scale that we're looking at when we model and when we're doing these traffic analysis. The other thing that I want to mention is that we look at certain times of day when we're measuring level of service, and one is the AM and one is the PM. So when we say AM peak or PM peak, we're looking at a series of hours during the day. AM, in this case, we were looking at 6 to 10 AM, and PM, we were looking at 3 to 7 PM. So we know that those are the heavily congested hours of the day and kind of our worst case. So that's what we want to model. And we anticipate that other times of the day, midday, overnight, we're not going to see the level of congestion that we see during these peaks. All right, next slide. Okay, so jumping into level of service in a little more detail. So I talked about A through F. And this table on the right-hand side kind of gives you an illustration or a description of each of those level of services, A, B, C, D, E, and F. From a traffic engineering standpoint, anything of a level of service C or better, so A, B, and C, everything in the yellow box, is considered generally acceptable. There's some delay, but nothing that's going to cause any major concern. and is typically not going to require any sort of modification to that roadway. Once you start getting into D and especially E and F, that's where you should really have a lot of concern, and you want to start looking at, okay, well, what kind of improvements can we make to improve that traffic flow? So we're aiming for a level of service A through C in all cases. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the modeling first, and then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to pause, and then I'm going to talk about the demonstration. All right. So I see in the chat from Sally, in urban areas, level of service A and B are bad news for urban areas because they encourage speeding and allow people to just kind of drive as fast as they want in urban areas where you have a lot of pedestrians. And that's very true. We talk a lot about within the design trying to slow people down. And so I think that's a really good point. And we're going to be looking at how the free flow is going. So in the sub area Vista model, this is the travel demand modeling software that we use to try to understand what is going to happen in the future and kind of predict those future conditions. So this model, we can evaluate a single project, or we can combine a bunch of projects that may happen and kind of see what happens to the roadway network. This particular model, we looked at an existing year of 2017, so pre-COVID, normal traffic flows, and then we projected that out to 2030. So this is assuming that everything is going to go back to the way it was pre-COVID, and that growth patterns are going to continue the way that they have been out until 2030. So when I talk about the build scenario, what's going to happen in the future, I'm talking about what's going to happen in 2030. This model is extracted from the Atlanta Regional Commission's regional model. So it's right in line with what the region uses to predict what's going to happen across all of Metro Atlanta in the future. We try to look at measures of quantity of travel, how many people are traveling, the quality of travel, what is the experience of that travel, and accessibility. Are there other ways that people can get around within a network? The one thing that this model does not evaluate, we cannot predict the volumes or the congestion of bicycle and pedestrians. This model is specifically meant to understand the impacts to vehicular travel. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we looked at several scenarios. And you can see here we have scenario 1A, 1B, and 1C. Scenario 1A is that no build. What happens in the future if everything stays the same? Scenario 1B is, okay, what happens if we do a shared space from West Peachtree to Forsyth Street, but what also happens if they build bus only lanes on Peachtree Center Avenue, which is being evaluated right now? And then 1C, a more worst case scenario, okay, what if we have the shared space? What if we have bus lanes on Peachtree Center Avenue? And what if we convert some lanes on Cortland and Piedmont to bike lanes and reduce the capacity for vehicular travel? What is that going to do to Peachtree Street? What is that going to do to the downtown network? Next slide. So I'm going to share the worst case, that 1C scenario, the results of that, to kind of see what might be happening in 2030. So next slide. Okay, so I want you to particularly pay attention to average speed. You can look at these other numbers. VMT refers to vehicle miles traveled, and VHT is vehicle hours traveled, and VHD is vehicle hours delayed. So if you look at average speeds, which is in the southeast corners, yes, thank you. You can see we've got them segmented as segments of Peachtree Street. So in the orange, you're looking at North Avenue to West Peachtree Street. In the green is West Peachtree Street to Forsyth Street. That's where the shared space is happening. And then Forsyth Street to Marietta Street. So no surprise, congestion increases when you reduce lanes for a shared space, when you're reducing to 4 to 2. And you can see that the delay is increasing, especially in the shared space segment by 23%. What you can also see are these average speeds are reducing, which, to Sally's point, and something that, you know, we think is very important as a part of this project, we want to slow drivers down. We want them to be aware of other users of the street and be able to take in their surroundings. So you can see the average speeds are actually decreasing quite a bit. In the shared space area, it's going from 15 miles an hour to just under 13 miles an hour. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned level of service, and this is in 2030. So this is not what's happening today with the demonstration. This is what we are projecting is going to happen in 2030. And you can see that most of the segments, both in the AM and the PM, are still fairly acceptable. Things are still flowing pretty well on average. The one area that shows a little bit of concern is from West Peachtree Street to Forsyth Street, traveling southbound in the afternoon. And we've got a level of service C, and we're predicting that that will result in a level of service E. So now we're getting pretty moderate delays. You can also see in the orange boxes where we do have reduced level of service, but as I mentioned before, level of service C or better is generally acceptable. So it's just that one area PM southbound from C to E that may cause a little bit of concern. Next slide. Okay, so this is scenario A. So this is, what if we just did the shared space and we didn't do anything else? You can see that the results are fairly similar. We still have one area of concern, that southbound direction in the afternoon from West Peachtree Street to Forsyth Street. Otherwise, everything is operating pretty well. Okay, next slide. And again, this is that scenario C, so you can look at it again. We've got relatively good operations throughout, but we've got this one segment that may cause some concern. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second and see if there's anything in the chat, any questions. Okay, I see another comment that some cities are even accepting a level of service G, which I can't even imagine what kind of congestion comes with G, because level of service F is pretty gridlocked. So Jennifer Brooks asks if the projection assumes that the pandemic does not matter at all. Yes, it does make that assumption. It is assuming, and what it does is it takes your existing year, which in this case was 2017. That's kind of the latest pre-pandemic data that we had in this model. And what we do is we look at historic growth patterns of Atlanta and what ARC is projecting as growth patterns in Metro Atlanta, and we project those growth patterns into 2030. So this VISM model does not take into account any pandemic factors. This is if everything goes back to normal and we can continue on the trajectory that we had pre-pandemic. Stephen says, if it's level of service E, won't drivers just adjust their routes? Great point, Stephen. Yes, we think that a lot of people, if there are alternate routes to take and they do not have a destination on Peachtree Street, if the congestion is bad, then they will find another way around it. And so will Waze, and so will Google, and so will Apple Maps. So they'll find you the fastest route. And if it's not on Peachtree and you're not trying to get to Peachtree, it'll probably reroute you. And then another comment, making driving less comfortable is essential to encouraging more people to walk, bike, and use transit. All right. Great. So let's move on to the traffic analysis. So I talked about the modeling. We did that before the demonstration, trying to predict what's going to happen. Now I want to talk about, okay, now that the demonstration is in, what are we actually seeing, and what can we glean from the data that's being collected and the analysis that we've done? Next slide. So our traffic analysis was essentially a 3-step process. Step 1, we had to collect traffic data. So cameras were put out on Peachtree Street, and they were collecting video data all the time for 3 consecutive days, every other week. And I'll talk about the locations. So we collect those traffic counts from the video cameras, and we had them out before the demonstration. And we also had them out after the demonstration, so we could compare before and after. We took that data that we collected and we ran what you call a synchro analysis. This is a standard traffic simulation model that traffic engineers use. And they take traffic counts, they put it into this simulation, and at an intersection level, they can tell you how much delay is being caused by an improvement. They can tell you what kind of turning movements are happening, and it can also give you the information that you need to figure out what kind of improvements are needed. So once we ran the synchro analysis, then our traffic engineers had to analyze all of those outputs and put it into a format that's easy for, admittedly, me, who is not a traffic engineer, I'm a planner, easily for me to understand what is happening out on the roadway. Okay. So data collection periods. So we collected data before the demonstration in June of 2021, and we collected data after the demonstration. We broke those up into 2 30-day periods. These correlate with the 30-day reports that Monique mentioned earlier. So the first 30 days was the end of June to the end of July, and the second 30 days was the beginning of August to the beginning of September. All right, next slide. And we collected data at 4 intersections. The first one, Ellis Street, then Andrew Young, then John Portman, and then Baker. So each block that has an intersection with a signal, there's a video camera that was attached to it, and we were watching all legs of each intersection. So what did we see in overall trends? So we collected data on vehicles, pedestrians, bicycles / scooters, whether they were in the street or in the crosswalk. So this is pedestrians. So we collected data on 3 days: Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. Sundays are in green, Mondays are in orange, Tuesdays are in blue. So these percent increases or decreases are compared to the 30-day before period. So on Sundays, for example, Sundays in that 30-day period after, so into June to into July, in the afternoon, we saw an overall increase of 23% of pedestrians out on Peachtree Street. We saw very significant increases on Mondays and Tuesdays in the AM and the PM. We saw a lot of people out there Monday mornings and Tuesday mornings, a 42 and 50% increase in pedestrians. So those are the general patterns. Now let's go to the next slide, and you're going to see that the data is organized in the same way. Sundays, green; Mondays, orange; Tuesdays, blue. This is compared to the 30 days before. So you have the 30 days after on the top, 60 days after on the bottom. And you can see that total bikes in the crosswalk, again, on Mondays, we were seeing a major increase in bicycle and scooter. They were getting classified as bicycles on the video feed, but major increase in bicycle activity on Mondays. All right, next slide. So those were bikes in the crosswalk. These are bikes that were actually in the travel lanes on the street traveling with vehicular traffic. Again, on Mondays, we saw a general increase in the 30 days after. One thing that I want to mention as we're talking about this is let's talk about external factors. So we monitored all of this, but it's difficult to determine, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about how we try to account for these external factors. But we have to remember the 30 days after was June and July. It was summer. School was not in. We were still feeling pretty good about the pandemic. The Delta variant hadn't really taken hold. I think you can see when you look at the 30 days after and the 60 days after, and you see those major differences. When you're talking about the 60 days after, you're talking about August. You're talking about people are going back to school. You're talking about the Delta variant became very prominent, and a lot of people were going back to remote working. And so there's a lot of these factors that can cause some of these numbers. It's not just the demonstration, but again, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, next slide. And vehicles. So this is to Stephen's point that when there's congestion, people are going to find another way around. And I saw his question about, well, doesn't that cause congestion on other roadways? I'm going to show some examples of what we saw on some parallel north-south roads. But generally speaking, if you can disperse the traffic into those other alternate routes, what our model was telling us, because we looked at the entire downtown network, the model tells us is that even though people may be finding alternative routes, the dispersion is there's so many options of north-south parallels that it doesn't have a significant impact on the downtown network as a whole, and everything still operates and functions pretty well. But you can see here that we're seeing some general decreases in vehicular traffic. Could be because of the demonstration, could also be caused by those external factors that I mentioned. Okay. Take a break. Let's see, other questions. There's a few of them coming in. So I don't know if somebody's monitoring them and you want to ask me something now. Okay, so somebody mentioned that there could be less traffic overall because people are switching to other modes. There's a question about improving MARTA to make it more accessible. I'm not going to respond to that, but let's mark that and make sure somebody else does. And then, you know, I think there's some question about pandemic recovery and it's unknown and how it's going to impact traffic in the future. And I think that that's a very valid point. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. What I can say with regards to traffic is we've been monitoring traffic volumes throughout the pandemic, over the course of the last year. And we're seeing, generally speaking, in Metro Atlanta, I can't speak for every single roadway, but generally speaking, traffic volumes are back to almost pre-pandemic levels. And so I think from a traffic engineering perspective, we're building the confidence that the projections that we had before are still going to be pretty valid looking 10 years into the future. However, with that being said, I think it's very important that as a part of this project and the continued demonstration that we continue to monitor the traffic and see what the traffic patterns continue to do throughout the pandemic. And that will help us better predict what kind of impacts the pandemic is going to have on traffic moving in the future. Okay, so going back to the synchro analysis, this is just a reminder of the level of service. So moving on. And let's go straight into the findings. Okay, so the way that we have this organized is we look at each intersection. Remember, there are 4 intersections. We're going to start from the north. We're going to work our way south. within each intersection, I have a slide on each day that we collected traffic, Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. The way that this slide is organized, in the green, you can see the level of service by AM and PM in the 30 days before. So Baker Street on Sundays in the morning and afternoon, operating free flow. The delay is in seconds, and that is there is an associated threshold for when you go from A to B, B to C, C to D, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just telling you how many seconds you might be sitting at an intersection waiting to move. So in the 30 days before, you might sit there for about 8 seconds before you can move and get through the intersection, which equates to a level of service A. In the 30 days after, that decreased to a level of service B in the morning and A in the afternoon. Same with 60 days after. We saw a level of service B in the morning and a level of service A in the afternoon. So I just want to generally explain how these slides are organized, and then I'm going to go through the rest of them pretty quickly. Okay, so Baker Street, Sunday, next slide. Monday, everything's still looking good. We got A's and B's. Tuesday, still looking pretty good, A's and B's. Can't be mad at A's and B's. John Portman on Sundays, level of service B. This is a pretty heavily traveled intersection. So we don't have any A's, but we're still looking pretty good at B. Next slide. All right, John Portman on Mondays. We're starting to see level of service in the mornings on Mondays in both the 30 days and the 60 days. That's still acceptable. It's not too bad. You're sitting there for about 20 seconds. Tuesdays, same kind of thing, same kind of pattern. Generally B's, but we got some morning congestion at level of service C. Andrew Young International, this is the big intersection, but operating pretty smoothly on Sundays. Mondays, operating pretty smoothly at all B's. Tuesday, again, operating smoothly at all B's. Ellis Street on Sundays. This was the worst performing intersection of all three. I will say that. So you can see we've got C's popping up more frequently in the AM and the PM on Sundays. Next slide. Mondays, same kind of thing. We're seeing some C's on Mondays, and then Tuesday, more C's. But again, relatively acceptable. We've got some delay. We know that people are slowing down as they're driving through here, which is a good thing for the other users, but still generally acceptable. So we felt pretty optimistic with these results. All right, next slide. We wanted to present what we saw during DragonCon, one of the biggest events in downtown Atlanta. This occurred over the weekend, Labor Day weekend, this year, and we collected data on Sunday, September 5th. Vehicular traffic was pretty good that day. We didn't see anything alarming. I mean, we did see some level of service C's and some increased delays, especially in the afternoons at a couple of the intersections. But overall, traffic flowed pretty well. What I think is really impressive is the pedestrian traffic. So in the 30 days and all of the Sundays in the before period, we had a total of 1,400 pedestrians. On that one Sunday on September 5th, we had almost 13,000 pedestrians. The indication that the level of service and the delay is level of service C or greater tells us that the pedestrians were also moving efficiently through those intersections, was not causing any major delays for the vehiculars. So you didn't have a bunch of people like darting out in front when they didn't have the proper crossing signals, and that everybody was able to get through as much as they needed to at those crossing signals and when there were walk signs. That's something that we glean from this information. That is not something that was modeled. That's just something we're taking from the data. Okay. Let's breathe for a second. There's a lot of data and a lot of numbers. And I'm seeing a lot of activity in the chat. Somebody talks about how the heavy rail runs under Peachtree. It can carry way more people than Peachtree. Yes, accurate. How is the shared street project addressing first mile and last mile connectivity? I'm gonna put a pin in that one, and I'm gonna have either Monique or Addie answer that one. At all.
Hey, Kirsten,
yeah.
we'll talk a little bit about that in some of the closing section of the presentation. So.
Okay. So I'm just gonna let y'all review those questions and then we'll get to it in the Q&A. But generally speaking, all of the intersections are operating at acceptable levels. We are seeing some additional travel times and some delays, but again, they're marginal. We're seeing a lot of increase in pedestrians during the demonstration, which is encouraging. And we're seeing vehicular volumes decrease, which indicates that people are finding other ways around. So again, these just reiterate some of our findings. Downtown Atlanta can handle big events still. Bicyclists and pedestrians are increasing. We didn't see substantial increase in congestion. Next slide. I just want to briefly mention another analysis that we did using another data source called RIDIS, which helps us collect travel time and speed information. And what we did is we compared Peachtree Street speed and travel time data with the parallel routes. So this was getting to somebody's point about congestion on alternate routes. So we wanted to see basically if the same patterns that were happening on Peachtree were happening on other parallel routes. So you can see here the ones that we looked at. We have a lot of graphics, and these are going to be in a white paper that's going to be made available, talking through the methodology. But basically, we looked at the northbound network travel times and the southbound traffic times. And what we saw is that there were very similar patterns on Peachtree Street as there were to the parallel facilities, which tells us that the demonstration project itself is not causing delays, that there are several other external factors that are causing increased travel times or decreased speeds across all of these north-south routes. So next slide, you can just kind of flip through these. These are all just graphics looking at northbound, southbound, looking at northbound Peachtree Street in particular, looking at southbound, and you can see the mile per hour reductions during the demonstration and during the time of day. Okay, so I'm going to let Joel pick up here and talk a little bit about the monitoring emergency response.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joel Mann. I worked with the tool team as well. And one thing that we looked at in particular that complements the traffic analysis work that Kirsten just walked through. This is arguably, our most important function of the streets, right? Making sure that they can provide for public safety service and responses. So we worked closely with the Atlanta Fire and Rescue Department, who were very generous in sharing data on service calls that they made. They actually provided us with citywide information so we could look at just the demonstration project area, but go a bit further than that. And we, a few of the findings at a kind of very basic summary level are that we didn't really see, significant change with the demonstration project there. This is taking a look at a period from the beginning of March until the demonstration project was set up at the end of June, and then looking from that point until about the end of October. So kind of similar time periods, actually about a similar number of calls, about 150, 160 in each period. But the average response time in that period really didn't change significantly. It was, just a few seconds increase. And interestingly, the overall kind of span of response times, the spread between minimum and maximum, actually got a little bit narrower. The calls overall did not tend to be as long with the demonstration project. I'll be fair and say, I don't think that means the demonstration project, necessarily did anything to change how the fire trucks move through, but it did not do anything to impact them either. And the takeaway from that is that we've still got movement through this area, with the two travel lanes. Another thing though, and this is on the next slide, Monique, another thing that we took a look at with that in particular is the kind of the bigger context of that, because for those who don't know, fire stations in Atlanta tend to respond to kind of a service area. They tend to stick within that before you get into the next zone or the next district, which is why we have many fire stations spread throughout the city. Everything serving the demonstration project area, which on this map is highlighted in yellow, is coming from either Station 1 over in Castleberry Hill or Station 4, which is on Edgewood Avenue, just east of the connector. And we're kind of at a natural dividing line between those two. You can see the green dots shown on this map are Station 4 calls, the blue dots are Station 1 calls. So we're kind of on that edge, which suggests that you're at the end of the service area anyway. What that means is that there's a lot happening that would affect the travel time that's not part of this demonstration project. So to account for that, to account for the kind of circumstance that we faced, or the coincidence of geography of these, we wanted to make sure that we had thought through everything with emergency responses. And we also took a look at the area just north of that yellow district where Peachtree splits off from Hardy Ivy Park and West Peachtree begins, because those could, based on the location of stations 1 and 4, those could be places that fire engines are having to go through our demonstration project to reach there. So we wanted to take a look at those as well. And it was a similar kind of breakdown. Average time was about the same, a few seconds difference. And the minimum and maximum spread was actually a little bit less during the demonstration period as well. So overall takeaway here is that these emergency response calls that need for the street to work are still able to use the street and get to it. And there hasn't really been any change since the demonstration project. I think we're going to turn it back over to Monique after this, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Thanks, Joel. So considering all of that data that Kirsten and Joel just went through, and the observations that we have either from the residential community or the business community or ourselves, we made adjustments based on that feedback. We did these 3 adjustments in November, in mid-November. We heard concerns about modern mobility and emergency response vehicles blocking the travel lanes when responding to calls. So we added pull-off areas in the middle block. So that's Peachtree Street between John Portman and Andrew Young. And those pull-off areas are on each side for situations like that, whether it's modern mobility or emergency response vehicles, they can use the space without blocking the travel lanes. We also been working closely with Hotel Indigo. We realized the impacts that they've endured, and so to make sure that their valet area works for them, and they express concerns about the lack of space for the valet drivers to receive patrons, and sometimes the valet drivers have to stand into the travel lane, and so we increased the width of the space to address that concern. Lastly, there were concerns about larger vehicles turning within the space, so we adjusted some curb radii to give more space for those vehicles. So the team, so we're out there pretty frequently, whether it's adjusting planners or just walking through the space and observing some things. And we observed some interesting behaviors. that, for the record, are not allowable now. But it does point out to the need of something like a shared space in this area. A typical shared space provides more flexibility, such as, sometimes angle parking, parking closer to the building, like this guy here. So it provides for that flexibility. Right now, again, we can only test certain elements of a shared space, but some, with some constraints, they're still present. And so most of these behaviors that we see on the screen will possibly be permitted in the shared space, but for right now, again, for the record, these behaviors are not allowed. So what is ahead in the future of this project? In these next slides, we will be discussing programming within the space. We will be discussing the phase 2 of the demonstration project, the preliminary engineering phase of the project, and other downtown projects. So as far as programming, we have seen the potential of what can be done in the shared space. Since the demonstration project, we've had the pleasure of having 2 major parades within the space, Dragon Con and the Braves Championship space, arguably one of the fastest parades on record. Parking Day, which had chalk artists out creating beautiful chalk art, additional on-street seating, and different vendors like Costa Coffee and Mocha Pops, all within the people-friendly space. As this space continues to evolve, this topic will be one of the topics. We would love for the residential and the business community to be heavily involved in. We want the programming in this space to reflect the community. As we touched on earlier, phase 2 of shared space is slated for spring, summer of next year. This will include the addition of more outdoor seating, as we experienced on Parking Day, added seating at the bus stops, and a painted mural in the expanded pedestrian area. We will continue to also have ongoing conversations with y'all throughout this process to make sure that we continue to move forward with what the community needs are. As the report of the findings were wrapping up, we applied for funding. We had an opportunity to apply for funding for 30% design or preliminary engineering through Atlanta Regional Commission. We are still waiting on the application status, and we will continue to keep you posted on that. As we said before, Peachtree Street has a very important role in our growing city. The shared space study and a demonstration project gives us opportunities to shape Peachtree for that role. This project is just a piece in the puzzle of our growing downtown. And so now I will turn it over to Kevin to give insight on the other downtown projects that we are embarking on.
Thanks, Monique. One of the things that we started the conversation with about tonight was the experience of downtown and public spaces throughout all of that. And for that, Peachtree is obviously a big piece of the puzzle, and what happens to that is incredibly important, not just for Peachtree itself, but as a model in the way we think about public spaces and throughout downtown and the rest of the city. And we thought it would be important to talk about, and I think there was a question asked back in the chat a while ago, and we'll get to the other questions here in a moment about, first and last mile connectivity. And we think about that a lot, maybe not in those specific terms, but in that fabric of public spaces, the glue that ultimately holds downtown together. And a redesigned Peachtree Street will do a lot of that for those 3 blocks or the larger stretch of the shared space study area. But there's other things that we're doing in downtown right now, and wanted to talk a little bit about those to close things out tonight. and ways that we're thinking about how we affect this in the rest of the city. One of the things that you may have noticed throughout downtown and really in other neighborhoods is through our Love Our Places program in the Department of City Planning is we've worked with business owners throughout the city to convert parking spaces into take advantage of the city's on-street dining permits. So the first ones, as you kind of see on the right, with the barriers and quick implementation to give, especially restaurants that don't have outdoor dining opportunities, to have that, knowing that is helpful in a time of pandemic, but also just things that we want to see in the city. And then came back and worked with business owners to do additional improvements through that. And some have taken even a step farther to really make them their own. We have 17 of these throughout the city. A couple of these you're seeing in downtown and is important to the work that we're doing. I will say, if you want to learn more about our Love Our Places program, it's on our atlcitydesign.com website. And we'll drop that link in the chat. For anybody interested, we have a call for applications for the next project type, bike corrals or creative bike parking, that we're accepting applications for right now through the end of the year. And we'll be looking forward to working with our neighbors and communities to execute those the way that we worked on these parklets this past year. Next slide. A similar project a little bit farther to the south, also on Peachtree. This is, we're calling it Peachtree South. It's just south of the 5 Point Station. Central Atlanta Progress has done something similar, and you're seeing some aspects here that we'd like to ultimately show up in our phase 2, where similarly they're converting parking spaces back to spaces for other use. Here you're seeing on street dining tables and chairs, the creative murals, but you can see that in the blocks just south of the MARTA 5 Point Station. Next slide. Oh, I think we skipped one. The Broad Street Boardwalk, we are aware that it's been closed for a very, very long time. While we've gone through the redesign process of that, I'm excited to say that we should have any day now a contract with a construction group. The redesign is complete, and it's not going to be much more substantially different than it is today. What we're interested in doing is making it structurally much more sound and learning from the first 2 years of that. Look forward to that space between Peachtree and Lucky Street intersections down to Poplar, that beginning reconstruction fairly soon in the new year, and we hope to have that space online as soon as possible. Next. And then also on Broad Street, a little farther south of 5 Point Station, we've been working with, again, with Central Atlanta Progress, the council district there, Newport, and looking at ways at how that street could potentially be improved and activated. We were literally a week away from doing a reoccurring Saturday market on that street. And unfortunately, those plans got put on hold. There's an interest in restarting that. And that is something we're eagerly working towards on South Broad Street. And again, this is between 5 Points and the Garnett Station. And for those of you familiar with our design studio, Atlanta City Studio there, it's kind of in the middle ground there on your left. And looking forward to having folks back there soon in the not too distant future. Next slide. And then one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle right now is with the MARTA 5 Points station transformation. This has been in the news a lot recently with announcing the selection of SOM as the design team. It's something that the city's been working with MARTA and conceptualizing a lot over the last couple of years. And we're really excited about not just improving the station underground itself. And that's certainly been shared in the news as well, what that could look like, but what's happening at the street level as well too. And a lot of conversation about what could happen if we reconnected Broad Street, not just as an emotional connection between downtown and South Downtown, but as actually a physical street connection for people, for bikes, for cars, for buses, that would really help kind of rebuild not just the vehicular network of downtown, but again, that fabric of our public space that we're really eager to recreate and bring back to help improve the experience of downtown for years to come. Next slide. And that's, again, I think a good place to wrap up here tonight. I know it's been a long presentation with lots of data to talk about, but beyond just what we're seeing in the demonstration, and I know that Commissioner Keenan kind of commented that it is a clumsy emulation of a shared space, and we fully acknowledge that. We've been out to test certain aspects of that, of what would it look like if we were to reallocate those lanes and experiment. And there's been a lot of good things there, a lot of things that we're still working on. But we're excited about a path forward with this. There's still a lot of work left to do. We're excited this part of the study has concluded, but we'll be looking forward to working with everybody as we move forward with a shared space for Peachtree Street. I think with that, we'll go to questions. Sonia and Jason have been watching the chat, and we'll have those. We'll be ready to go back through all of those. So do we have one we want to start with?
Yeah, so it looks like Sally has her hand raised, and so you should be able to unmute Sally now.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I think the part where Kirsten was talking about the level of service really needs to be rethought, that having free flow traffic in a downtown area is horrible, that you don't want anything higher than C. If you're thinking of a bell-shaped curve, C or D is the best that for speed of traffic that you want. And you need to think of that as the best, not as a decline, because you want drivers to be allowed, but not encouraged. That when you have a one-way street like we have on Peachtree Center in Cortland, a third lane adds very little congestion, a fourth lane adds none. And since we have these uncongested streets, because you don't have to deal with left turns like you do on a two-way street, what we want on Peachtree is fewer cars. And so making it a little bit uncomfortable, making some friction so that people actually enjoy seeing the buildings and other people is what you want. So maybe saying, hey, A and B are good convinces the Georgia DOT, but from the expectation or perspective of an urban lifestyle, you don't want anything higher than C. C or D is really what you want. And so I just think in terms of the analysis of traffic, it needs to come from that perspective. So,
Thank you, Sally. Appreciate that.
What? Okay, I'll mute myself
Well,
now.
we did have some questions come through the chat as well, so we'll alternate those.
Okay.
And the first was from Sonia King. And she had a couple. Is there a plan to improve MARTA to make it more accessible? And what are your plans to accommodate Lyft, Uber, and DoorDash? Where should rideshare customers be picked up?
Okay. For the MARTA question, accessibility as far as the shared space, bringing the street up to curb level to where it will be more accessible for folks is one thing. I do know that MARTA is working on a station transformation. I don't know where that is or how that plays into, but we do talk to MARTA about how they operate within the shared space. And so we'll continue to have conversations with them. I do know that the facade is something that they don't necessarily control, but the accessibility part is another thing. The second part to that, which is the DoorDash, Uber, and Lyft, we have worked with Uber and Lyft about creating basically blacking out that zone. We've seen though that it's not as successful as we want it to be. So we are having conversations with them about how to make that more successful. We are also, there is a curb management study that CAP and Midtown Alliance are conducting, and we are also talking with them to figure out ways to manage the curb. The study covers the entire city, but we do want to see if we can take some elements from that study and apply it to this space.
Great. I believe Jennifer Brooks has her hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. I wrote my statement that I'd like to give as feedback just because I wanted to do it quickly and efficiently. I read Atlanta City Design, the aspiring to the beloved community. And I believed it, and I trusted that Atlanta was on track. Then I started paying attention, and now I'm reading the biography of the late Coretta Scott King, who defined beloved community, and I'll quote, "It's a spiritual bond that claims the energies of a diverse group of people who desire to serve a cause larger than themselves. The beloved community is fueled by unconditional love, feels like family, and transcends race, religion, and class. Beloved community does not design for hardship. The shared Peachtree project has imposed measurable hardship on many, many stakeholders. As long as the data is analyzed without a sensitivity analysis, it's nothing more than a tool to stifle dissent. Shared Peachtree can evolve from this iteration into something that's user-friendly and safe, and that allows the businesses to recover from the pandemic. Let's revitalize and restore the once beautiful granite sidewalks that are on Peachtree Street. Those very sidewalks welcomed the world in 1996 and allowed for vehicle traffic to go smoothly through and slowly. Let's aim for ADA compliance that would make Peachtree Street welcoming and accessible for everyone. I'm in favor of imagining and designing improvements that actually work well for Atlanta and that honor everyone as beloved, not some that are more beloved than others. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments, Ms. Brooks. I know we've spoken many times throughout the course of the project. You know, as those that many of us had a hand in creating Atlanta City Design, understand the context of that really important statement. And in spite of that, we feel that the grand vision that we have for creating a shared space on Peachtree and all these other improvements are very much still in the spirit of that. I think to look at the demonstration project and for some of the challenges that it's had and some of its shortcomings, and we freely acknowledge those as a reason not to proceed, is false. Is that there are what we're seeing is that by design, this is possible, that there are still challenges out there in management and enforcement in the way that we've used our spaces over the years that are not in the best interests of a city that's walkable, bikeable, and designed for everybody. And that as we learn from trying something new in the city, we have an ability to do something better. So that we don't intend for the condition as it is on Peachtree right now, a demonstration condition, to be the final condition of the street. We want to improve upon that. And that's the point of doing that in this study. So this process is far from over. We recognize that there'll be many voices that will continue to shape that. And we look forward to continuing this conversation throughout the remainder of the phases of the demonstration. And as we go into, designing the actual shared space itself, and look forward to continuing those conversations with everybody. So thank you for your time. And I think we have some other questions too.
Yes, this is John Monholland. I am on the Transportation Committee and Board of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. Just wanted to thank y'all. We had a vote with the Downtown Neighborhood Association meeting recently that unanimously supported this project. We're very excited to see it progressing, and think it's part of our core of having safer, more active streets in downtown. So look forward to the next phase of this moving forward. It's very beautiful. Thank you.
And then we also have a couple questions in the chat. The next one is, how is the shared street project addressing the first mile and last mile connectivity?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little more. I think it's just kind of reinforcing what we closed in with the presentation, that in a lot of cases, when you get down to the first mile and last mile connectivity, it's what is that experience like, whether you're taking transit or even driving by car. And when we're starting to think about our streets, our sidewalks, whether they're shared spaces or complete streets, that's the goal of this and many of those other projects, to really think about what is that, because at some point you're walking or otherwise not in a vehicle to get in your destination. So we'll have lots of conversations about many of the other things that we focused on there, and if you're interested in those, please follow us and stay tuned.
We also have pandemic recovery is a big unknown, especially in the next 5 years. How can you have confidence in the projections that they're valid? Does it make sense to redesign Peachtree Street in light of this?
Yeah, data collection is a challenging thing right now. I mean, who knows in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, what normal looks like, whether it's because of the pandemic or many other things. I think what we feel good about is from the initial model with the last kind of known and accepted data set, that assumes a worst case scenario, that whatever we kind of look like in the interim and in the long term will either match that or fall short of that. There are a lot of conversations to see what shakes out in terms of people working from home or in a hybrid situation and not commuting. Right now, Kirsten made the comment, maybe I'll invite you to back me up on this from a transportation perspective purely. But if we're looking at this against kind of what the conditions were before and have time to play that out, I think that's helpful. Also, that's a big reason we extended phase one, knowing that as we were starting to see conditions return to normal, we wanted to see more. We wanted to see things as they unfolded with events, and it was not a continuous, unfortunately, pathway towards reopening. And so there's benefit to continuing to observe that. I don't know, Kirsten, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so I think everything that Kevin said is absolutely correct. And I think if we've seen anything from the pandemic so far, which is a fairly small data set, is that traffic patterns actually decrease. So I do think that our projections could be considered a more worst case. But as this project progresses and getting into preliminary engineering, this analysis is going to have to be done over again, and we're going to have new data sets, and it's going to tell us new things. The other thing that I'll mention about the level of service and what we're seeing is that, we were taking it with the geometry of what is out there today, with these various design elements to help or to encourage people to slow down even further with some of the curves and the tree canopy. That could also impact, what the volumes and what the congestion, what speeds are going to be in the future.
And next up, we have, I saw the East Side Tax Allocation District mentioned a few times. What's up with the TAD?
Maybe we could get clarification on what that question means.
I can jump on that one. We had
Okay.
it listed as part of the activation strategy by Emory. And that was because that area is within the East Side Tax Allocation District. And it was just an opportunity to explore, is there anything that can potentially come from that can be applied to Peachtree Street and the businesses along it?
And then we have some questions about the data around activation of a percentage of people that don't support additional bike improvements, outdoor dining, farmers markets, and small scale vending and retail. What are you offering by way of compromise to support those stakeholders?
Could I try to repeat that again? It's the joy of doing this from home. I had a little bit of background noise.
Sorry about that. So someone was asking about the elements of activation along the corridor that people anywhere between like 35 and 45% have not supported. And those were additional bike improvements, supporting outdoor dining, supporting farmers markets, and supporting small scale vending. And their question was, what are you offering by way of compromise to support these stakeholders?
Sure. I mean, I think for the short term with the actual immediate configuration of the demonstration project itself, we've been out there making modifications to that. And even before the project was installed, we were working actively with business owners that would be interested in things like on-street dining to help not only just get them through the permitting process, but also getting tables and chairs. And in that example too, it was a challenge again, and I hate to always lean on the pandemic for this, but there was a lot of excitement, a lot of response to that early on, because folks thought we were reopening, and when that took kind of a hard pause there, we only had one that went through and operationalized on-street dining. We had another that's holding and kind of still waiting and see, and then we rolled into the winter months, so that was a challenge. One of the things too about the shared space, whether it's the demonstration project or going to the ultimate design, there is not just a matter of we design it and walk away from it. It's how do we program it and activate that, and we're taking a lot of ideas. Some of that's feeding into the things like parking day that we've done now. But we also understand that for a life term of the shared space, or for any of our public spaces, there's a lot of work to do in terms of event programming and operating and maintaining it. And so what's been eye-opening about this is how much work that really entails, and what we need to do from kind of building an organization, whether it's by street or by district, of being able to manage those things actively and be responsive. I think that's one thing we've learned so far is how best we can situate ourselves to be responsive to those concerns. I won't say it's been perfect, but we're learning and eager to continue working with those. But I think for the majority, people see the benefits of this, even though there are still some of those criticisms, and we'll continue to work through that. That's the point of a demonstration project.
And our next question is, why Peachtree Street?
I would say, Peachtree, we've thought about it as our main street. It's for a very, very long time. And it's I'll go back to what we opened with, that if we have all of these public spaces throughout downtown and throughout the city that need to change as the city grows and serve all of us in a much different and better way. And we felt like that Peachtree had its challenges, and that they're by design and other means that those could be addressed. But if we can solve them on Peachtree, where else better to hold that up as a model for where else we can make this happen throughout the rest of the city.
And I think that actually wraps up our Q&A.
All right. Well, in conclusion, I would say, again, invite everybody to go to the sharedpeachtree.com website, see the document. Our contact information is there, and we can pop that in the chat. So if there are additional questions or comments on the report itself, we invite you to send those. But otherwise, we thank you all very, very much for your time this evening and throughout the course of the project. And again, this is just another kind of milestone within what we're doing with Peachtree, and look forward to continuing the conversation in the new year and beyond. And wish everybody very happy holidays and a great new year. Thank you all.
All right. Have a good one.